Pac-12 football, and it's been a obviously super strange season. I hate that pretty much whenever I talk about any sport or any topic, it feels like it has to go through COVID-19 and everything because it's been such a big part of sports, obviously, and everything in 2020. But for the Pac-12 in particular, because they started so late and they kind of it seemed like we're trying to promote this plan of like we're going to start later and it's going to be safer and it's going to be better. And what actually happened is they started later. It's not safer. The state's protocols didn't change or got more strict in some situations, and they just had way less opportunities to actually reschedule games. So now you have some teams who've played one game, some teams who've played 4 games. You have USC playing on Sunday this week against Washington State, maybe, if that game even happens. It's extremely strange. And then to pile on top of all of that, the only team that anybody really expected to be good just lost to the Oregon State Beavers. So chaos is like underselling what's going on in the Pac-12. But I guess we could just start with kind of the decision making that led them to this. How did you feel about them deciding to play late and what it's kind of done for this conference so far?
And you follow me on Twitter. I'm not. I've been a big advocate of, and I've been against the fact that they're trying to return because I knew this was going to happen.
Yeah,
the climate, the COVID climate was not friendly
right
at that point, and you knew things were going to get worse. And so I'm just like, I hate to say I told y'all, but the very thing that we were all saying was going to happen,
right?
It's happening, and it's so tough to watch because once again, going back to earlier, doom scrolling. We're sitting there, just all right. What game is getting canceled today? I mean, we had to celebrate 100 games getting canceled this season on Saturday because I figured, okay, it's going to be a matter of days, before, and it wasn't even maybe an hour. Yeah. And then you had, there's another cancellation, and you're just like,
yep,
what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing here? And the Pac-12, I heard something today where Arizona State's only played one game. Like Arizona State, I feel bad. Like in some cases, because the kids, it's not their fault.
Right.
For some of it, it's not their fault.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel bad for the universities putting these kids in a situation because they aren't getting compensated. Mm-hmm. They are essentially the face of their university's COVID struggles right now.
Right.
I was reading something where UCLA had I believe at the UCLA Med Center, they had nurses on strike because the testing was going towards football players.
Right.
And not enough for frontline workers. What are we doing here?
Right.
Like it's that Taylor Twellman gif. Like, what are we doing here? I find myself, I wake up with that gif in my head, and I say it to myself at least twice a day.
Yeah. Well, you make
other than that, everything's fine.
Oh, yeah, we're good. you make a good point because it's easy to blame the players. Like when you hear that story of like these nurses are protesting because these players are getting the test ahead of them, it's not the players' fault, but that's how it's going to be perceived a lot of the time. And you're treating these players like essential workers, like literally what we have determined is the definition of essential workers, and they're literally not getting paid at all, which is massively problematic. It's been problematic for decades that's not happening, and in this situation for these kids to be risking themselves, risking their families to play football, to make the university money when they're not making money is bordering on a legitimate tragedy. Like it's like one of the most saddest things that's happening.
I'm afraid and I said this earlier in the season, and when teams were kind of delayed in starts, I said this is going to end with a player or coach passing away.
Yeah.
We are definitely tempting fate. And, they're talking about, it doesn't hurt the young. It doesn't hurt. It COVID does not care.
No.
COVID does not pick an age group. They don't
Mm-mm.
pick a race. They don't pick a creed. Like it
Mhm.
is just keep yourself safe and it's so tough to watch. And I think in a way, and you may disagree with me on this, it's made the football a bit more timid at
Yeah,
times.
I could see that. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's so easy for people to say, well, it doesn't impact young people, and like in some, yeah, in a lot of cases it doesn't, but you have like 29-year-old Eduardo Rodriguez played for the Boston Red Sox who developed myocarditis. Like you've seen it with other guys too. Von Miller said that he was like bedridden for 3 weeks, and like I can think of maybe 5 people on the planet who are in better shape physically than Von Miller. So
And
like,
he said he still hasn't
yeah,
recovered.
it's still impacting him. It's absolutely nuts. Anyway, football is still happening. There are still games, a few of them at least, to be discussed. Not nearly as many as in typical seasons, and not very many left to go. The season is nearly over already for the Pac-12, at least. The most notable game that happened over the last week, obviously, was this Oregon State game. The Ducks were ranked, I think, just inside the top 15, or maybe just outside the top 15
Yeah,
in
around
this poll.
13. Yeah.
13. They were them and USC were the only ranked teams. USC is technically undefeated, but has not looked very good really in any of their games. I think Pac-12's only chance at really having a team have any relevance was the Ducks, and then they went out and gave up 41 points to the Oregon State Beavers. I think Oregon State's maybe a little better than some people thought, but not nearly. This shouldn't have happened, and people were blaming Tyler Shuck, the Oregon quarterback, which is hilarious to me because he did not give up 41 points to a bad team. I don't know how much this game you got a chance to check out, but what were your thoughts seeing Oregon kind of throw away the entire Pac-12 season with this one?
You know, I'm not shocked, but at the same time, you're watching this all go down,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, yeah, that's about how it would go. Like
Yeah.
it, uh, because if you think about it, Washington took care of business.
Mm-hmm.
If Washington and Oregon both took care of business, more than likely your final game of the season in December is going to be Washington at Oregon, Pac-12 North Championship on the line.
Right.
More than likely, both those teams are at least top 12, maybe top 10,
Right.
if the ball bounces their way. I think Washington doesn't have a playoff argument. I don't think they do, but I think they still can manage a way to go undefeated in
Right.
the regular season. I think the team is good enough to do it. You can't have slow starts like you did against Utah.
Sure.
But it was just, yeah, watching that Oregon game, it's everything you expect out of the Civil War, the
Mm-hmm.
wackiness. I'm still called Civil War.
Yeah.
The wackiness, are you serious? And like the
Mm-hmm.
fog, like all
Yeah.
of that you just expect. And you're like, yeah, this is going to be one of those games.
Yeah.
This is going to be one of those weird games that, I mean, it's a highlighter against an orange marker. Crayola could have really sponsored that game. I would have been proud of them. But yeah, no, it's Oregon doing what Oregon does, letting teams hang around,
Yeah.
putting teams in position to succeed, putting the other team in position to steal victory from you, because
Mm-hmm.
Oregon should have won that game.
Yeah.
I'd say by a touchdown or so. And Oregon State is much better than they have been the last few
Mm-hmm.
years. But to a man, you've got the better side.
Yeah.
You've got to close out those games, and this is why the Pac-12 has the reputation it does, because you just can't trust these teams. And you were mentioning USC.
Mm-hmm.
I think USC is a pretty decent side.
Yeah.
Their issue is they're this agent of chaos that it is. Oh, Clay Helton suddenly realizes with like 5 minutes left in the game, oh, if I lose, I'm fired. So he goes he turns into like 04 Pete Carroll,
Yeah.
and everything works out, and you're just like, oh, Clay,
Yeah.
Clay.
I've watched every minute of every USC game this year, and
I'm so sorry.
it has been a roller coaster. It is, I don't
They
have
got a lot of talent. They
They
have a lot
do.
of talent.
They have a great receiving core. I mean, they're a wide receiver right now. I mean, you look at Michael Pittman's doing great. Juju, Robert Woods, Nelson Aguilar is having a good year. Like they put a ton of great elite receiving talent in the NFL. Their group right now with Tyler Vaughns, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brew McCoy, Drake London. Like they have a great group, and yet they have this air raid offense, a great quarterback, a great group of receivers, and it doesn't work like 80% of the game. I don't know what's going on.
So I was afraid because I'm a huge Notre Dame fan, as you know.
Uh-huh. Yep.
I was watching Notre Dame at USC in 2018.
Sure. Yeah.
And Notre Dame had to finish undefeated in the
Mhm.
regular season. You got to go to USC. There were elements of that game, and that's the moment I swore if you would put a gun to my head, I would have said Clay Helton's going to get fired the next day.
Yeah.
Because they were, spreading, going 4 and 5 wide.
Yeah.
They were just absolutely shredding the Irish on those first 2 or 3 series of the game. And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, God. Like, this is going to be the game where USC returns. Like, this is Goliath will wake up and God help us all. And then you're just like, Clay, what are you doing?
Yeah, what happened?
Why are you going to single back? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? And then 2019 came.
Yeah.
Saw how that happened. Well, I thought 2019 was hilarious because the one game that they kind of threw the monkey wrench into everything, I don't know if it was either Utah or Stanford, but it was the same night that Washington played Cal.
Yeah.
And I was at that game until like 2 a.m. in the stands. Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Like 3-hour delay.
Right. And so I'm sitting there like on the concourse watching this game with a bunch of old heads, and we're just like, oh, USC is going to be – and like they ended up winning the game, but you're just like, I don't trust that team at all. And then a few weeks later, USC comes in. You're like, what are they doing? And I was sitting in the USC section because my buddy had tickets there.
Mm-hmm.
And like all these USC people are just so pissed at Clay Helton. And they're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, these people really hate this man. So as a Notre Dame fan, I'm loving it because I'm like, I hate this school so much.
Right.
So I'm kind of like getting a thrill out of watching you guys suffer. But no, USC, I think it would be pretty appropriate for 2020 in the Pac-12 if USC ends up playing in the Pac-12 championship game, winning it with like a 3-0, 4-0 record, and you're just like, how?
That is exactly what I think is going to happen because they got Washington State, and if that game gets played, I think they'll win that one. Washington State hasn't played in a few weeks, and I don't think they're all that good. And then they'll sneak into the Pac-12 championship game, and they'll play Washington or Oregon, and they'll sneak an ugly victory, and it'll just be terrible. It'll just be bad.
No, here's what I think is going to happen: Washington or Oregon plays USC in the championship game.
Yep.
That's when USC's offense just explodes.
Yeah, they score like 48.
Right, like this is like Pete Carroll, Steve Sarkisian, they're all back, and it's like like USC fans are going to sit there and celebrate like, oh yeah, we're back, and it's like, no, you aren't, because you're going to go to the Fiesta Bowl against BYU, and they're going to completely shut you out like 48-0. So congratulations.
And between those two games, Clay Helton will get like a 3-year extension, and BYU and USC fans will realize like, oh no, what have we done? This is the worst win.
You ever seen that movie Anchor? Yeah, I'm sure you've seen Anchor.
Oh, of course,
So when Veronica Corningstone gets the anchor job, and they scroll down the row of the guys, and they're just like, no. That's what I get with USC fans every time Clay Helton pulls one out, and they're just like, no, this was not supposed to happen. I'm just like, guys, this is what you get.
I mean, Seahawks fans and USC fans are similar in that they're almost always more mad after wins in a lot of ways. You see it so much.
USC fans, I totally get.
Yeah.
Seahawks fans, I don't get it. I'm a tortured Vikings fan. I don't understand why you guys are upset after a win. I mean, we beat Carolina, yesterday? And I'm just like, oh, God.
Just relieved.
We didn't wreck the car, but we got home.
Yeah, no, Seahawks fans are a grumpy bunch for reasons that I think are oftentimes unnecessary. Yes, the coaching is old school. Yes, they let teams stay in games even like they're doing tonight, but they win a lot of the time. They win 11 or 12 games a year. They make the playoffs every year since except 2017 for the last like what 8, 9, 10 years. It's fine. Things are fine.